At dawn, the Pacific is serene. The horizon melts into soft layers of gold and blue, the sea breathing slow and deep as if guarding secrets too heavy for the surface. Beneath this calm, far below where light fades to shadow, lie the remains of America's lost U.S. submarines. Steel goes to the silent service, resting in a submarine graveyard scattered across half the world. The ocean has swallowed their names and numbers, their missions and last words. But still they endure, preserved in the eternal stillness of the deep, silent witnesses to a war fought beneath the waves. In the years of the Second World War, when the Pacific became both battlefield and tomb, these submarines were America's unseen hunters, sleek, steel predators gliding through darkness and pressure, unseen yet feared. Each boat carried 70 men in a fragile balance between survival and disappearance. For every enemy ship sunk, another submarine vanished without a trace, leaving only silence on the radio and ripples that closed too quickly to mark their passing. The sea floor now forms a monument. Hulls lie tilted on coral slopes, hatches sealed, gauges frozen mid-needle. Fish drift through empty control rooms where officers once whispered coordinates under red light. A chart still lies open on a desk, a coffee cup turned to silt, and in that haunting stillness, history waits. The Pacific naval history of these submarines is not written in books. It is etched in salt, pressure, and rust. Time has softened the violence that took them, yet every sonar ping today echoes the same question. Where did they go, and how did they die? No gunfire marked their end, no flare rose to the surface, just a crushing weight of water and the slow surrender of air. Their stories, hidden beneath miles of current and memory, remind us that victory came at an invisible cost. As the waves roll endlessly over their graves, the Pacific keeps its silence, and the lost submarines of a long-ago war continue their eternal patrol, undisturbed, unforgotten, and unseen. In the early 1940s, the U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet stood at a crossroads. Battleships and carriers drew the attention, but in quiet shipyards along both coasts, another arm of the fleet was awakening, the submariners of the silent service. These were men who knew they would fight their war unseen, sealed in steel tubes beneath an ocean that tolerated no mistakes. America's submarine force was small, underfunded, and built from doctrine still tied to peacetime theory, yet the crews who volunteered understood that courage would have to fill the space where technology lagged. Inside a World War II submarine, life pressed close. The air was hot and heavy with oil, metal, and sweat. A single corridor connected engine room to torpedo bay, narrow enough that two men could not pass without brushing shoulders. Every inch of space was used, racks above torpedoes, bunks beside diesel engines, and control panels dense with switches that hummed in the dim red light. The constant vibration of the engines became a lullaby, and when silence came, it carried a weight of its own. These submarines were masterpieces of compression, every system, oxygen, ballast, power, navigation, balance between precision and catastrophe. Doctrine taught caution. Submarines were scouts, not hunters. The U.S. Navy's early vision of submarine warfare remained defensive, tied to fleet actions that never came. Yet even before Pearl Harbor, a new generation of officers began to see differently. They studied how the German U-boats had nearly strangled Britain, and they imagined the Pacific as a vast chessboard where stealth could outweigh size. When war came, these ideas hardened into resolve. Aboard each boat, the crew became family, men who trusted one another with their lives, because in a submarine there was no room for doubt. The diesel engines pounded rhythm into their veins, and each dive felt like crossing a threshold between the living and the lost. They trained to fight without witnesses, to strike from the dark and vanish again beneath the waves. Few outside the Navy understood what these boats could do, but within the service, a quiet confidence grew. The silent service was ready, not for glory or headlines, but for the lonely, relentless war waiting beyond the horizon. The morning of December 7, 1941, shattered the illusion of distance. The Pearl Harbor attack struck not only ships and airfields, but the very rhythm of the Pacific War. Smoke curled above burning battleships, black columns rising into a blue sky that had once seemed safe. Amid that devastation, a few vessels escaped the inferno. Among them, the submarines moored at the edges of the harbor. Within hours, as the last bombs fell, those submarines became America's only means to strike back. The chaos that followed was complete. Orders were confused, communication broken, and intelligence scarce. Yet the U.S. Navy submariners moved fast, slipping their moorings before nightfall. Their mission was desperate: locate the Japanese fleet and avenge the fallen. Crews worked through exhaustion, navigating seas still choked with oil and debris. They saw the outlines of sunken ships beneath them, the ghosts of their own fleet resting in shallow water. Above deck, the air reeked of smoke and burning fuel. Below, the diesel engines throbbed like a heartbeat of revenge. The early Pacific War began in silence, with submarines threading through waters already swarming with Japanese aircraft and patrols. The first missions were raw improvisation, no tested tactics, no clear targets. Some fired torpedoes that failed to detonate. Others returned with stories of near misses and narrow escapes. The commanders learned quickly that this would not be a war of grand fleets and distant gunfire. It would be fought in darkness, one submerged patrol at a time. In those first months, the submarines were America's hidden counteroffensive, steel predators sent out from a crippled navy. Their success or failure would decide whether the Pacific Fleet could still matter. Each boat that left port carried the weight of national grief and expectation. In their cramped control rooms, men who had witnessed the burning of Pearl Harbor now stalked the same empire that had brought that fire. They learned to fight unseen, to rely on instinct, and to endure the suffocating quiet before an attack. When their torpedoes finally struck home, somewhere beyond the horizon, no headlines followed, only the slow, grim satisfaction that the silent service had found its voice. The era of battleships had ended. The age of the submarine had begun. The first American submarines to venture into Japanese waters did so with more courage and certainty. The USS Sea Lion and USS Perch, among the earliest to patrol enemy coasts after Pearl Harbor, were fragile lifelines stretched in across an ocean now ruled by the rising sun. Their steel hulls groaned under pressure, their sonar screens glowed faintly in the dim red of the control room, and every man aboard knew the odds. They were hunting blind, armed with unreliable torpedoes, scant intelligence, and sheer determination. When the USS Sea Lion left the Philippines, she carried not only her crew but the spirit of defiance. Her patrols were among the first attempts to disrupt Japan's advancing convoys, to slow the tidal sweep of empire across the Pacific. But the sea was hostile, the skies worse. Japanese destroyers hunted with precision, their depth charges falling like thunder. Sea Lion would never return, destroyed in an air raid at Cavite before she could fulfill her promise. Her loss, early and unavenged, became a warning written in flame. This war beneath the wave would exact a brutal price. The USS Perch took up that challenge next, prowling the Java Sea as Allied forces collapsed around her. Each dive into enemy waters felt like entering another world, a realm of total silence, broken only by the hiss of air tanks and the distant beat of propellers overhead. In that silence, men measured time by fear. When sonar pings rolled through the hull, they could almost feel the enemy's gaze searching the darkness. Perch fought back with everything she had, stalking convoys, launching faulty torpedoes that struck but failed to explode. Each dud felt like betrayal, yet the crew persisted, attacking again and again until, cornered and battered by depth charges, they scuttled their ship to prevent capture. The survivors of Perch were hauled from the sea, prisoners of a war that had barely begun. Their story, like Celian's, was a mixture of bravery and futility, of machines unready for the task their men demanded of them. In these early submarine losses, the U.S. Navy learned its harshest lessons. Courage alone could not sink a convoy. Faith alone could not fight a war. Yet from these wrecks rose a hard-earned resolve that would soon turn the silent service from hunter to hunter and the depths from enemy domain to American battleground. The early months of submarine warfare in the Pacific were marked not by triumph, but by frustration. Commanders set out to hunt enemy shipping with confidence and skill, only to discover their weapons were betraying them. The Mark 14 torpedo, the standard armament of the U.S. submarine fleet, became infamous for its unreliability. It ran too deep, struck without exploding, or detonated prematurely, revealing a submarine's position to its target. Time after time, crews watched through periscope lenses as their torpedoes hit squarely amidships, then simply bounce off, leaving the enemy steaming away untouched. The failure was more than technical. It was psychological, undermining faith in the very tools meant to win the war beneath the waves. Each patrol became a trial of patience and ingenuity. Captains learned to adapt through experience and loss, testing new firing depths, adjusting fuses, and doubting official instructions. The bureaucracy ashore refused to believe report from the front. insisting the torpedoes were flawless and the fault lay with the men. But it was the submariners themselves, those sweating in confined control rooms, listening to destroyers circle overhead, who uncovered the truth through painful repetition. Their discoveries came at the cost of lives and lost opportunities. In these crucibles, new submarine tactics evolved. Commanders abandoned textbook approaches and began to fight with instinct. They learned to strike at night on the surface, to use radar and moonlight instead of periscopes, and to trust the sea shadows to conceal their movements. Engagements became dances of sound and silence, torpedo wakes, sonar pings, and the terrifying roar of depth charges rolling down through black water. Men slept in berths, nerves raw, knowing that one mechanical failure could turn the ocean itself into their coffin. By mid-1943, the tide began to shift. After relentless pressure from field officers, the Mark 14 torpedo failure was finally acknowledged and corrected. Exploders were redesigned, depth settings recalibrated, and confidence cautiously restored. The lessons learned in those bitter months forged a new kind of warfare, precise, relentless, and deeply personal. Submarine tactics in World War II had matured through pain and perseverance. What began as a campaign of trial and error was becoming a deadly art, crafted in silence, perfected in fear, and tested in the unforgiving depths of the Pacific. In the summer of 1942, a slender submarine slid out from Dutch Harbor into the gray northern seas. Her name was USS Grunion, one of the newest boats in the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet, bound for the cold Aleutian Islands where fog and enemy patrols mingled in equal measure. Her crew of 70 were young and eager, men untested but willing to face the unknown. Their orders were clear: intercept Japanese supply ships near Kiska, strike fast, and disappear again beneath the waves. It was a lonely mission on the edge of the world, where daylight stretched thin and the sea carried an almost human silence. For weeks, Grunion sent regular reports, enemy contacts, minor engagements, and one successful attack against a small transport. Then, on July 30th, a final transmission crackled through the ether. One Japanese destroyer sighted, attacking. After that, nothing. Static, then silence. The U.S. Navy waited, listening for her call sign, but the ocean answered with emptiness. Grunion was listed as overdue and presumed lost. One more name added to the long roll of missing submarines whose graves the sea refused to yield. Families at home received telegrams that offered no detail, only sorrow. For decades, the story of Grunion lay dormant, whispered among veterans and historians who scoured archives for clues. The Aleutian Islands, with their freezing currents and volcanic seabed, kept their secrets well. Storms erased wreckage, and shifting sediments buried evidence deep below. But time has a way of bending toward remembrance. In the early 2000s, the sons of Grunion's captain began a private search, driven by the need to understand how their father and his crew had met their end. In 2007, sonar scans revealed a shape on the seabed off Kiska Island, broken, yet unmistakably a submarine. Remote cameras confirmed the nameplate. The hull ruptured near the bow, torpedo tube still open as if in mid-battle. The USS Grunion had been found at last. The ocean had kept her safe in its cold embrace for 6 to 5 years. Her rediscovery gave closure to families who had lived half a lifetime without answers. Beneath the icy waters of the Aleutians, the Grunion rests still, a monument to courage and uncertainty, her silent patrol finally complete. By 1943, the submarine war in the Pacific had shifted from solitary hunts to coordinated precision. The U.S. Navy, studying the brutal efficiency of German U-boats in the Atlantic, began forming its own Pacific wolf packs, small groups of submarines that hunted together across the endless ocean. Each pack operated as a silent network, sharing intelligence by coded radio bursts, converging on Japanese convoys that tried to slip through the gaps between islands and trade routes. The Pacific, once too vast for coordination, was now mapped with invisible lines of pursuit and ambush. In these operations, strategy met intuition. A lead boat, often commanded by a seasoned skipper, would scout ahead, tracking targets through sonar echoes and periscope glimpses. Once contact was made, signals flashed in bursts of Morse across hundreds of miles of water. The Wolfpack closed in. Submarines positioned themselves like blades in the dock, waiting for the convoy to sail into their trap. The first torpedo trails would ripple the sea, followed by explosions that tore the quiet apart. Confusion spread among the Japanese escorts, and while they scrambled to depth charge one attacker, another boat would strike from a different bearing. Convoy warfare became a deadly game of deception and endurance. Conditions aboard were tense beyond measure. Crews whispered in control room as sonar operators listened for propellers through the static hum of machinery. Each time depth charges rolled down, the boat shuddered, lights flickering as bulkheads creaked under pressure. But they held their nerve, trusting in tactics honed by experience. The Pacific wolf packs learned to coordinate retreats and feints as well as attacks, vanishing into the sea's vastness before counterstrikes could close in. The results were devastating. Japanese supply convoy began to collapse, strangled by unseen enemies that could strike anywhere. Oil tankers, troop transports, ammunition ships, all fell victim to the precision and patience of coordinated submarine warfare. By late 1944, Japan's merchant fleet was dying faster than it could be rebuilt. The wolf packs had turned the Pacific into a graveyard of steel, proving that the silent service, once fragmented and underfunded, had evolved into a force of surgical lethality. Submarine tactics in World War II had reached their peak, a symphony of silence, courage, and calculated destruction that unfolded beneath the indifferent waves. In the annals of the silent service, few names burn brighter or fade more mysteriously than the USS Wahoo and her commander, Dudley "Mush" Morton. He was brash, instinctive, and utterly fearless, a man whose confidence inspired both admiration and unease among his peers. Under Morton's command, Wahoo became the most aggressive hunter in the Pacific, striking deep into Japanese-controlled waters when caution would have advised retreat. He believed submarines were meant to be predators, not scouts, and he led by example, standing in the conning tower during attacks, barking orders with calm precision as torpedoes roared from their tubes. By early 1943, Wahoo's record was legendary. Her patrols read like a catalogue of daring. Convoys shattered in the Yellow Sea, transports burning from bow to stern, destroyers sent plunging into black water. The Japanese, stunned by the sudden ferocity of submarine attacks, began calling her the Sea Devil. Morton's crew adored him, trusting his audacity as much as his seamanship. But behind the victories was a growing sense that the ocean itself was watching. Every success drew the hunters closer to danger. In October 1943, Wahoo slipped through the narrow, treacherous waters of the La Perouse Strait between Hokkaido and Sakhalin. The mission was simple: intercept shipping and return with intelligence. The seas there were shallow, the currents unpredictable, and the Japanese defenses tightening. On October 11th, Japanese aircraft reported sighting a submarine surfacing briefly amid whitecaps, then an eruption of bombs and oil rising to the surface. Wahoo failed to report back. Weeks turned to months, and Morton's name joined the growing roll of the missing. For decades, no one knew what had become of her. Some believed she was trapped in a minefield, others that she had succumbed to her own torpedoes. Only in 2005 did divers locate her remains on the seabed of the La Perouse Strait, hull torn open by depth charges, still bearing the scars of a final fight. Inside, instruments sat undisturbed, and the silence seemed almost reverent. Commander Dudley Morton and his crew had gone down with their ship, warriors claimed by the sea they once ruled. The USS Wahoo's story ended where courage met inevitability, beneath the cold northern waters, where legends sleep in darkness. The USS Tang had earned a reputation through audacity and precision. Under Commander Richard Kane, she became one of the most successful submarines in the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet. 24 enemy ships sunk in less than a year, each patrol sharper and deadlier than the last. Kane was a master of stealth and timing, a man who treated every torpedo as a chess move in the vast oceanic game of war. By October 1944, Tang was feared across the Pacific, her very name a whisper of approaching doom among Japanese sailors. But in the unforgiving realm of the deep, mastery and misfortune are separated by inches and seconds. On the night of October 24th, Tang prowled off the coast of China, shadowing a heavily guarded convoy. The crew moved with wordless efficiency, the red lights of the control room flickering over faces drawn tight with focus. When Kane gave the order to fire, the fifth torpedo left its tube with a hiss and vanished into the darkness. Seconds later came the impossible, an explosion close astern. The weapon, a defective circular run torpedo, had turned back. In an instant, the hunter became the prey. The blast tore through Tang's aft compartments, flooding the engine room and throwing men from their posts. The submarine pitched sharply by the stern, alarms wailing as lights failed and water poured in. A cane and a handful of men were hurled into the sea. The rest were trapped below as the submarine plunged into the black. Inside, chaos gave way to discipline. Survivors in the forward compartment sealed hatches, fighting the rising water. They gathered in the forward torpedo room, where air grew thin and the temperature rose with every passing minute. For hours, they waited, whispering prayers, counting breaths, listening to the creaks of dying steel. When rescue seemed impossible, 9 men attempted the unthinkable. Using the Momsen lung, they forced open a flooded escape hatch, one by one ascending through crushing darkness toward the moonlit surface. Only 5 made it. Commander Kane, pulled from the water by the Japanese, spent the rest of the war in captivity, haunted by the memory of those who had not escaped. The tragedy of the USS Tang stands as one of the cruelest ironies in submarine history, a boat destroyed not by enemy hands, but by its own weapon. In the silent calculus of the sea, perfection demanded a price, and Tang paid it in full. By mid-1944, the silent service had become both the sharpest blade in America's arsenal and its most fragile. Success had come at a cost measured not in ships sunk, but in the growing number of submarines that simply never came back. Patrol after patrol slipped beneath the waves and vanished. No distress calls, no debris, just silence. Among those were the USS Scorpion and USS Scamp, 2 boats whose stories ended without witnesses, leaving only the aching emptiness of unanswered messages. The USS Scorpion was last heard from in January 1944, patrolling near the East China Sea. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander Maximilian Rye, reported enemy contacts and then fell quiet. Weeks later, the patrol expired with no further word. Search aircraft combed the area, but the sea yielded nothing. Some said she struck a mine. Others believed depth charges found their mark. Whatever the cause, Scorpion became another lost submarine of World War II, her crew entombed in darkness somewhere off Japan's coast. The telegrams that followed were brutally concise. Missing in action, presumed lost. For the families who received them, the phrase was both final and unfinished. The USS Scamp followed only months later. Under Commander John C. Hollingsworth, she ventured into the treacherous waters off Tokyo Bay in November 1944. Japanese records would later suggest she was detected, depth charged, and sunk with all hands. Yet at the time, her disappearance was only another question mark in a sea of them. At bases from Pearl Harbor to Fremantle, empty bunks stood ready, meals set aside, letters waiting unopened. The toll within the submarine force was heavy but quiet. In mess halls and dockyards, men read the names of lost boats on bulletin boards: Scorpion, Scamp, Trigger, Gullet, and nodded without words. Wives and mothers clung to the faint hope that captivity might still mean survival, but the ocean was rarely merciful. The Navy called them overdue, a phrase that softened nothing. Each loss rippled outward through the ranks, yet every new crew volunteered knowing the odds. By war's midpoint, the Pacific had become a vast cemetery of unmarked graves, each submarine resting in perpetual patrol. The men who sailed after them did so with the ghosts of Scorpion and Scamp in their wake, reminders that beneath the victories lay a quiet brotherhood of the missing, whose duty ended not in port, but in the deep. The ocean in wartime was a living thing, vast, deceptive, and cruelly patient. For the submariners of the U.S. Navy, it was not only the element they fought in, but the enemy itself. Beyond the reach of sunlight, the sea hid countless traps. Japanese minefields laid across narrow straits, drifting explosives tethered by cables that swayed in unseen currents. A single careless turn could shear open a hull or tear through ballast tanks. There were no alarms, no warning flares, only the dull, metallic thud that ended everything. The Pacific minefield became invisible front lines, claiming submarines without a trace. But mines were only the beginning. The Japanese anti-submarine warfare network evolved quickly, and by 1943, the once complacent convoys moved with destroyer screens bristling with sonar and depth charges. Submariners called it the hunt. When the sonar ping began, sharp, rhythmic, echoing through the steel hull, it felt like the heartbeat of death itself. Men froze at their stations, listening to the sound bounce closer with each return. Then came the explosions. Depth charges rolled into the water above them, each one descending with a hollow hiss before erupting into thunder that shook the boat from keel to conning tower. Inside the submarine, the world became chaos. Light bulbs shattered, gauges spun wild, and rivets wept seawater from the seams. The pressure hull groaned like a living creature under torture. Men bit their tongues to keep from screaming as the sound reverberated through their bones. There was nowhere to run, no cover to seek, only faith in the strength of steel and the skill of the helmsman easing the boat deeper into blackness. At 300 feet, then 400, the temperature dropped and every breath tasted of metal and oil. Survival depended on silence. Engines stopped, pumps stilled, and men breathed shallowly to keep from betraying their presence. Cigarettes burned without a sound. The crew waited as destroyers prowled above, listening, guessing, killing by instinct. Some submarines endured for hours. Others were crushed before help could come. When at last the pings faded and the sea grew quiet again, relief was tempered by exhaustion. The ocean had spared them, this time. For the silent service, every patrol was a wager against an unseen enemy, and every victory a reminder that death in the deep was measured not by sight, but by sound and pressure alone. By late 1944, America's submarines were no longer just hunters. They had become gatherers of secrets. Beyond sinking ships, they were now the unseen agents of intelligence, slipping close to enemy shores to deliver scouts, rescue downed airmen, and intercept coded transmissions. Each mission required absolute stealth, for discovery meant certain death. Among these shadow operatives, the USS Seawolf and USS Bonefish carried out some of the most dangerous assignments of the war, missions that blurred the line between heroism and tragedy. USS Seawolf had already earned distinction after 2 years of daring patrols, sinking numerous enemy vessels across the Pacific. By September 1944, she was reassigned to an intelligence mission supporting General MacArthur's return to the Philippines. Her orders were to deliver supplies and pick up Allied prisoners and evacuees from the island of Morotai. In the fog of battle, however, confusion ruled the airwaves. A nearby convoy of U.S. destroyer escorts detected an unidentified submarine, silent, submerged, and unresponsive to friend or foe challenges. Believing her to be Japanese, they attacked. Depth charges and hedgehog rounds thundered through the sea, followed by a rising slick of oil. When Seawolf failed to report in, her fate became clear. The Navy later confirmed the unthinkable. One of its own had destroyed her. 83 men vanished, victims not of the enemy, but of the chaos of war. The USS Bonefish met her end under a different kind of silence. On her 8th patrol, she ventured into the Sea of Japan, one of the most heavily defended regions of the Pacific. Her orders were to conduct submarine intelligence missions and strike enemy shipping near Honshu. For days, she transmitted steady reports. Ship sunk, positions changed, fuel running low. Then, on June 19, 1945, a final message, attacked and diving. Japanese records would later describe a massive underwater explosion, debris, and an oil slick spreading across the waves. Bonefish never surfaced again. These boats were the unseen eyes and ears of a war fought across horizons. They carried no banners and won no public glory, yet their work shaped the very maps of battle. Seawolf and Bonefish, one lost a tragic mistake, the other to enemy fire, embodied the perilous dual life of submarines in the Pacific. Silent assassins and silent witnesses, vanishing into history without a trace. By the final year of the war, the submariners sailing from Fremantle, Australia, knew the odds had turned grim. The Pacific's northern passages, once lanes of opportunity, had become killing grounds. Chief among them was the Luzon Strait, a narrow, turbulent corridor between the Philippines and Taiwan that linked the South China Sea to the open Pacific. It was a throat through which Japan's remaining supply convoys passed, and the U.S. Navy was determined to choke it. But the enemy knew it too, and every mile of that sea was sown with mines, patrols, and aircraft. It became known among submariners as the Philippines Graveyard. In the early weeks of 1945, the USS Shark II departed Fremantle for what would be her final mission. She was young, fast, and eager for battle, her crew confident after earlier victories. Their orders were clear: intercept Japanese shipping near the Luzon Strait and cut the Empire's final arteries of supply. For days she reported progress, convoys sighted, attacks made. Then silence. When the Shark failed to respond to repeated messages, unease spread through the command center. Japanese reports later told a story the Navy never heard in real time: a destroyer squadron detecting a submarine, a fierce counterattack, oil rising to the surface. The Shark II was gone with all 8 to 7 aboard. Only weeks later, another patrol followed the same path. The USS Babel, under Commander Condé Raggett, was last sighted south of Palawan, prowling the very waters that had swallowed shark. On February 4, 1945, Japanese aircraft reported a submarine surfacing briefly, followed by a direct hit from depth bombs. The explosion was seen from miles away. Like so many before her, Babel left no survivors. Her loss, one of the last before the war's end, marked the closing act of a brutal campaign. The Luzon Strait had claimed nearly a dozen American submarines during the conflict, each one vanishing without rescue or remains. The men who sailed from Fremantle knew this, yet still volunteered, understanding that control of the Pacific meant strangling Japan's lifelines. Their courage was quiet, their fate often swift. In the Philippines graveyard, courage met inevitability, and the sea, indifferent and immense, kept its terrible promise. The names Shark II and Babel joined the long litany of the silent service, boats that left port into sunlight and never saw the dawn again. The Java Sea, warm and deceptively shallow, became one of the most haunted stretches of water in the Pacific. Between its calm surface and treacherous seabed lay the remnants of a dozen vanished submarines, boats that slipped beneath the waves during the desperate early months of the war and were never heard from again. Among them were the USS Perch, USS Grenadier, and USS Keat, names whispered in wardrooms and remembered on plaques, but for decades never found. To the submariners who followed, these were not just wrecks. They were warnings, fragments of stories unfinished. The USS Perch was among the first to vanish. Cornered in the Java Sea after a fierce engagement in 1942, she fought until every weapon was spent. Depth charges ripped open her ballast tanks, forcing the crew to surface under enemy guns. Her captain gave the order to scuttle. The men destroyed their codes and instruments before surrendering to the Japanese. For years, Perch was listed among the missing submarines of World War II until the truth emerged through the accounts of surviving prisoners of war. Yet her physical resting place remained elusive until sonar scans, decades later, revealed a battered hull lying on her side in the silt, confirmation that her final act had been one of defiance, not defeat. USS Grenadier met her fate the following year. Caught on the surface by enemy aircraft near the Straits of Malacca, she was crippled by bombs and forced to the bottom. Her crew endured 2 days trapped in darkness, coaxing failing systems to life before surfacing under white flags. Captured and imprisoned, they carried her story home, but Grenadier herself remained lost. Modern sonar searches have traced anomalies on the seabed, but none confirmed. Somewhere in the Java Sea wrecks, she waits. The USS Keat's story is colder, quieter. In March 1945, she was returning from a patrol near the Ryukyus when she vanished. No distress signal, no oil slick, just silence. Post-war Japanese records revealed no attack. Some believe she struck a drifting mine. Others suspect a mechanical failure in deep water. Expeditions have searched her route, recording faint sonar echoes that hint at a shape, but the evidence remains inconclusive. Together, these lost boats form a triangle of mystery and memory across the Java Sea. Their signals are long gone, but in the sonar pings of modern explorers, faint ghosts still answer, brief whispers in the static, reminders that the war beneath the waves never truly ended. When the guns of war fell silent, the Pacific did not give back what it had taken. For decades, the whereabouts of many submarines remained unknown, entire crews unaccounted for, their final resting places marked only by coordinates on fading charts. Yet memory does not surrender easily. From the ashes of conflict emerged a quiet determination among families, veterans, and naval historians to find those who had vanished. Their search became both an act of science and an act of love. The U.S. Navy began the first systematic post-war efforts at submarine wreck discovery. Using early sonar magnetic anomaly detectors, survey ships traced faint outlines on the seafloor, sometimes ships, sometimes shadows. In the 1960s and 70s, advances in sonar imaging and deep-sea photography gave new hope. Researchers mapped thousands of square miles of ocean, uncovering forgotten wrecks that confirmed long-standing rumors and erased decades of uncertainty. Each discovery rewrote a fragment of history, turning missing into found. But it was not only governments that searched. Families who had lived with silence for generations began funding private expeditions. Sons and grandsons of lost submariners organized their own voyages, combining emotion with technology. What began as a quest for closure evolved into a new frontier of underwater archaeology. The Pacific exploration that once carried men to battle now carried there. Long after the war ended, the sea kept its secrets. Decades passed, technology changed, and the names of lost boats faded from headlines into quiet family prayers. Yet for those whose fathers, brothers, and sons had vanished without a trace, time offered no closure, only questions. Then, 70 years after the war, the ocean began to yield. Advances in sonar, deep-sea robotics, and the persistence of private explorers brought light into places where silence had ruled for generations. Among the most moving of these discoveries were those of the USS Legato and USS Grayback, two submarines lost in the final, furious months of the Pacific War, found only when the last witnesses had grown old and gray. The USS Legato was rediscovered in 2005, resting upright on the seabed of the Gulf of Thailand. She had vanished in May 1945 after a desperate fight with a Japanese minesweeper. When sonar images first appeared on the screens of the search team, led by former U.S. Navy diver Jamie McLeod, there was no doubt. The outline of the conning tower, the torpedo doors still open, even the handrails remained intact. Divers descended through 225 feet of water to find and preserve by silt and time, her hull punctured by a single shell hit. Inside were no remains, only the stillness of duty completed. For the families who had waited 3 generations, the discovery of Legato brought both peace and pain, peace in knowing, pain in remembering. 14 years later, the USS Grayback emerged from the deep near Okinawa. For decades, she had been listed hundreds of miles from where she actually lay, a clerical error that hid her resting place until Japanese researchers corrected wartime records. In 2019, the Lost 52 project located her at a depth of 1,400 feet. Cameras revealed the broken hull, the open hatches, and the shattered conning tower. On the screen, her name was still visible beneath the corrosion, a final echo of a ship that had once fought in silence. When these World War II submarine wrecks were found, the ocean's hold on memory loosened just slightly. Sons and daughters, now elderly themselves, laid flowers on the water above. For them, it was not discovery but homecoming. The Pacific, vast and eternal, had finally returned their loved ones to history, not as vanished names, but as found and honored sailors of the silent service. When the Second World War ended, the lessons learned beneath the Pacific did not sink with the submarines that never returned. They became the foundation for a new generation of undersea warfare. The experiences of loss, failure, and resilience forged during those years shaped every decision in the coming age of nuclear power and silent deterrence. The Cold War submarines that followed were not born from triumph, but from caution. They were designed to survive what their predecessors could not. Engineers studying wartime wrecks saw the marks of pressure and shock, the weaknesses of hull design, and the failures of primitive systems. From that came the double-hull configuration, stronger steel alloys, and improved ballast control systems. The old diesel-electric engines that had once filled compartments with fumes were replaced by reactors that needed no oxygen, granting nuclear submarines the power to remain submerged for months rather than hours. Yet beneath this technological leap lay a deep respect for what had come before. The men who built and sailed the new fleet understood that every innovation was written in the blood of those who had gone missing. Doctrine evolved with equal care. The U.S. Navy, haunted by the invisible deaths of boats like Wahoo, Tang, and Scamp, placed new emphasis on submarine safety. Escape procedures were refined, rescue vessels commissioned, and underwater communication improved. Training shifted from aggression to precision, navigation by inertial systems, sonar triangulation, and acoustic stealth. Submarine tactics once honed for ambush and convoy warfare transformed into doctrines of deterrence, silent patrols beneath the Arctic ice, carrying missiles instead of torpedoes. The goal was no longer destruction, but prevention. Still, echoes of the past remained. Crews of nuclear boats spoke with reverence of the World War II submariners, the eternal patrols who never surfaced. They studied their stories, their mistakes, their courage. In the hum of reactor rooms and the glow of sonar screens, history whispered reminders of fragility. Every safety drill, every redundant valve and reinforced hatch, trace its lineage to a time when steel failed and the ocean claimed all. The nuclear submarine evolution was a story of redemption as much as progress, an unbroken line from diesel smoke to atomic silence, from desperate survival to strategic endurance, all born from lessons written deep in the cold water memory. The search for the lost submarines of the Pacific has become one of the most poignant chapters in modern deep-sea exploration. What once required luck and rumor is now guided by science and compassion, by engineers, historians, and families determined to bring closure to the silent service. With advances in sonar mapping, autonomous underwater vehicles, and remotely operated cameras, the ocean's great silence is finally giving up its stories. At the forefront stands the Lost 52 Project, a volunteer-driven mission to locate all 52 American submarines lost during World War II, transforming history from a list of names into a gallery of rediscovered memorials. Using side-scan sonar, each expedition begins by sweeping thousands of square miles of seafloor, reading the terrain like a fingerprint. Subtle ridges, metallic shapes, and unnatural shadows signal the possibility of wreckage. Once identified, deep-sea robotics descend through crushing darkness to reveal what no diver could ever reach. The IOV's lights cut through black water to expose hull numbers, periscopes, even the delicate outlines of open hatches. These images, transmitted to screens aboard the research vessels, bring long-missing boats like USS Greyback, USS R-12, and USS Legato back into view after more than 70 years. Each discovery is both technical achievement and quiet eulogy. The teams behind these missions blend cutting-edge technology with reverence. They do not disturb the wrecks. They record them. High-resolution photogrammetry and 3D modeling allow the submarines to be reconstructed virtually, preserving every dent and rivet for study. These digital memorials let families, veterans, and historians explore the sites without intruding upon them. In this way, underwater archaeology has become an act of remembrance as much as research. Each ROV submarine search rewrites a fragment of naval history. It corrects misplaced coordinates, verifies final transmissions, and confirms or overturns decades of speculation. But beyond the data, it restores identity to the missing. When the Lost 52 Project reveals a new discovery, the images ripple through the community of veterans and descendants, turning uncertainty into understanding. What began as an oceanic mystery has become a bridge between generations, a collaboration of science, memory, and respect, proving that even at the planet's greatest depths, the past can still be found, and the silence of history can, at last, be heard. Beneath the restless expanse of the Pacific, silence reigns where voices once commanded steel and fire. The war has long since ended, its fleets dismantled, its veterans aged and gone. But far below, the missing submarines still linger, undisturbed on the ocean floor. They rest in rows no human hand arranged, scattered across trenches and ridges like forgotten monuments. Some lie upright, as if still on patrol. Others are twisted into the seafloor, their hulls half buried beneath coral and sand. Nature has reclaimed them with quiet tenderness. Coral blossoms along their decks, fish drift through open hatches, and seaweed waves where flags once fluttered. The Pacific Ocean floor keeps its secrets well. Light never reaches these depths, and sound carries strange echoes through the cold. The submarines that vanished, boats like Gullet, Pickerel, and Swordfish, have become part of the landscape, their riveted plates turned to reef, their names erased by salt and time. Each one holds a final breath of its crew, sealed forever in the pressure and darkness. The currents that sweep above them are the same that once rocked their hulls on patrol, indifferent to memory yet bound to it. In this underwater stillness, there is no distinction between victory and defeat, only endurance. The sea, patient and immense, has transformed machines of war into relics of peace. Their periscopes now host sea urchins, their propellers turn only in the imagination. Yet for those who remember, every sonar echo, every patch of seafloor mapped anew, carries the weight of presence. They are not gone, they are simply unseen. Naval remembrance lives on not in monuments of stone, but in the continuing search for them. Each expedition that crosses these waters listens for the faintest trace of their existence, knowing that somewhere below, duty and destiny still lie intertwined. The ocean guards them as it guards all things it has claimed, not with cruelty, but with permanence. Beneath the shifting tides, the missing submarines of the Pacific remain eternal. Their watch continues in silence, their stories suspended in the hush between waves, where time has no dominion and memory drifts slowly, like silt, through the deep. Dawn rises softly over the Pacific Memorial at Pearl Harbor. The first light touches the still water, and the gentle hum of the wind carries across the harbor where white marble meets reflection. Beneath this calm lies the weight of memory, names engraved in stone, each one representing a boat that sailed and never returned. As the sun lifts higher, the memorial comes alive with color. The red, white, and blue of flags mirrored against the quiet surface, ripples moving like breath across a sleeping sea. This place stands as both ending and beginning, where the story of the silent service folds into eternity. Hey, the Eternal Patrol is more than a phrase. It is a promise kept. Each submarine lost in the Pacific rests somewhere beyond the visible horizon, their journeys unbroken even in death. The U.S. Submarine Memorial honors them not as casualties, but as guardians of the deep. Beneath the polished bronze and engraved names lie the echoes of diesel engines, the murmur of watchstanders, the brief laughter of men who once defied the ocean's power. For every visitor who pauses to read, the silence speaks louder than any speech or anthem. The forgotten submarines of the Pacific are not forgotten here. They are woven into the daily rhythm of this place. The morning tide that glides against the seawall, the gulls wheeling overhead, the faint scent of salt and rust. The memorial overlooks waters that once burned with oil and fire, now calm, now eternal. Each dawn renews a covenant between the living and the lost, to remember not the machinery of war, but the devotion that drove men to vanish beneath the waves and never surface again. As the sun climbs above the harbor, its light spills across the engraved words, boat names, patrol numbers, dates frozen in time. The water beneath shimmers like glass, and for a moment it is easy to imagine that the sea itself is listening. The war has long passed, but the watch continues. The men of the silent service remain on duty, their patrols endless, their courage undimmed. The Pacific holds them gently now, their steel transformed into silence, their memory rising each morning with the dawn. In the calm that follows, history whispers only one refrain. They are still out there, on eternal patrol.